When was the first time in your life that you disobeyed the authorities? I really wish I could read your minds right now. Maybe. Maybe not. You may never have broken a law. It's possible. Many of you may never have participated in any kind of demonstration or organized act of civil disobedience. However, I'm still inviting you today to reflect and consider, when did you first disobey an authority? Let's say an authority figure in your life. It might have been a parent or a priest, a teacher or a therapist, a coach, or a spouse, a leader, or a law. I remember when I was 14 years old, 2 years after my parents had divorced, so this is the late 70s, and a friend who just was kind of obsessed with the Beatles, invited me to go see a popular show at the time that was called Beatlemania. We went together, this was a girlfriend, and we loved it so much that we stayed after the show to get the autographs of the performers. They were really friendly and nice with us, and they invited us to come back to another show, free of charge, I think, which we did. And it felt to me at the time that we had made friends with them. I think we were more like young groupies. And when their weekend shows were over and they were flying to Boston, I really wanted to go to the airport with my friend to say goodbye to them. I want to assure you this was all innocent fun. None of the performers ever did anything appropriate with these two enthusiastic 14-year-old girls. So I decided to ask my mother if I could go to the airport. I had figured out how to switch trains on my own using the trolley, or the T, as we call it in Boston. She listened me out, listened to my case, and then she said, "No. I don't think that's a good idea, Barbara." I don't remember if I yelled or cried. I do remember I walked a mile to the T station, made the hour-long trip to the airport, and said goodbye to those fabulous 4 young men. I remember getting home late and how confusing the whole thing felt. I generally liked doing the right thing, even at 14. I didn't like disappointing people, but despite the trouble I knew I'd be in, and the risks I was taking, which I was aware of, that time, something else felt more important than the rules or other people's expectations of me. So no matter what you answered to my question, there's not one of us here this morning who has not debated with ourselves about what is the right thing or the wrong thing to do, what is worth the risk and what is not, what is true or not true about God, or about the purpose of our lives, or about the nature of the universe. Just think about your own children or yourself as a child. Think about the questions children ask and how they master that simple yet powerful word, no, so young. We don't really need to teach each other how to question authority. It comes pretty naturally to most of us. It seems to be human nature. We expect adolescents to disobey because they're trying to differentiate themselves from their parents. Their behavior makes a statement as they break one rule after another. This is who I am. It's more than you think I am or who you want me to be. And as we mature, we tend to fall into line. A lay leader was telling me yesterday at our lay leadership retreat how surprised she is to find herself representing the man these days when she's much more accustomed to being the rebel. So it might be because he died young, but Henry David Thoreau remained a rebel throughout his life. And his life reminds us that at some point in our own lives, we may need to remember why we wanted to and why we did risk disobedience once upon a time. Or maybe it's not so long ago for some of you. I've heard Thoreau called many things. More than a rebel, for sure. He's been called a saint, a kook, and an icon of integrity. Born 200 years ago on July 12th, 1817, one of a group of several religious writers of the 19th century who were called transcendentalists, Thoreau was the most anti-clerical, anti-church, and anti-establishment of them all. He was so anti-all that, although he believed in a universal intelligence, he called it, and called Jesus the Prince of Reformers and Radicals, he also wrote in his journals that he preferred the sound of cowbells on a Sunday morning to that of church bells. You can see why Unitarians have long revered him. Thoreau chose to commune, to come into unity with, to experience community with all living things out of doors, rather than behind the closed doors in a human-made sanctuary like this one. And he was nothing if not critical. In his first published work, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, he included a long passage on Christianity. In it, he castigated Christians for their bigotry and intolerance and placed Buddha beside Jesus as a worthy moral teacher. This is in the mid-19th century. Along with his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, he rejected the idea of personal immortality, insisting that there is no heaven but that which lies about me. And he freely shared his impressions that people who clung to biblical miracles did so because there was no real miracle in their own lives. What is religion? Thoreau once asked. That which is never spoken, was his answer. So according to Thoreau, you can all go home now. Still, Professor Paul Bowler, scholar of transcendentalism and the author of what our own beloved Reverend Dr. John Wolfe says is the best book ever written about transcendentalism, writes, Thoreau regarded himself as basically religious. He was the prototype, perhaps, of so many of our friends and family, or even of ourselves, who say today, I'm spiritual, but not religious. I suspect Thoreau would claim that title if he had a few weeks to adjust to the 21st century. But then I also think he would have a lot to say about it. Because for 3 years, from 1836 to 1839, bright young Unitarians, men and women, there were women among them, seeking to find meaning, pattern, and purpose in a universe no longer managed by a genteel and amiable Unitarian God, gathered together, talked and wrote, were published, and discussed their writings, world religions, all of philosophy, and the need or not for social action. Thoreau was only 22 years old when they started to gather in 1836. And he died when he was only 45 years old of tuberculosis, a disease he struggled with from college on. So why are we still talking about him today? Because his life is an example of how our spirituality or our faith can form the foundation of a life well lived. Because his life is an example of how acts of disobedience may be connected to or even emanate from deeper movements of our own souls, which might help explain his lasting power and influence. And despite the fact that his work was largely ignored during his lifetime, Thoreau's words are probably more recognizable today than Ralph Waldo Emerson's are, his fellow transcendentalist. And if you wonder what I mean when I say his work was largely ignored, here's an example. Thoreau couldn't find a publisher for the book I mentioned above, his first. So instead, he printed 1,000 copies at his own expense. Self-publishing isn't new, apparently. Taking Emerson's advice and using Emerson's publisher, who did little to publicize the book. Fewer than 300 were sold, leading Thoreau to joke, "I now have a library of over 900 volumes, over 700 of which I have written myself." Still, we remember his words. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die to discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion." I have read those words upon request at countless memorials. Do you recognize this next passage? "If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now, put foundations under them." Or this one, "If a man or woman does not keep pace with his companion, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away." How many times have we heard or used this metaphor of a person walking to the beat of their own drum? Resistance without reward has power over our imaginations. What compelled this man to dream and to dare and to disobey when he gained nothing in return? Perhaps that's the wrong question. What did he gain that others could not see? For Thoreau was a man with few means, little money, and a sickly constitution. He was a man whose great love of his life refused his hand in marriage, a man who left or lost his first teaching job because he refused to administer corporal punishment, a man who loved to teach but could not keep the school he ran with his brother open after his brother died in his arms from tetanus, a man who worked in his family's pencil factory and as a surveyor and as Emerson's handyman, a man who died very young. And still, he inspired Gandhi and Martin Luther King to engage in spiritual and civil disobedience. He inspired John Muir, the great naturalist and conservationist, and the whole environmental movement. How did a man who lost so much and lived so short a time come to write such passionate and persuasive words about both the glory of the universe and about our responsibility to resist when our government is acting immorally in acts of civil disobedience? Somehow, he was free. Spiritual freedom also has great power over our imaginations. And sometimes, if not often, when we disobey as children or adolescents or even as adults, we are seeking a kind of freedom that we feel is our birthright, but that at the same time we're unsure how to claim. I remember when I left the East Coast for the first time, not to travel, but to live. I had graduated from an Ivy League college, was working for the Greater Boston Legal Services and the Lawyers Alliance for Nuclear Arms Control and with a local immigration lawyer, thinking I was headed to law school, but decided on very little evidence that the practice of law wasn't for me. And then I just decided to move. I didn't have a job lined up or much of a plan at all. I didn't have friends or family where I was going, which was Austin, Texas. No one told me explicitly not to go this time. But I can see the look on my mother's face as she waved goodbye to me as I drove away in the little red, rusty, two-door Chevy Monza she had passed down to me, with the shady character I had just met and hardly knew in the passenger seat. It was risky, for sure. And I will never know what life I would have led if I had stayed in Boston. But it doesn't matter. I did the next thing I needed to do to become more myself, to live into my depths, to be true, to be free. And my story is not that unusual. Not at all, really. There's a young woman in this congregation who was all set to be married. She had sent out the invitations and everything, and then she still had the courage to call it off. Because she sensed, despite what anyone or everyone expected of her, that getting married then wasn't the right thing to do. Sometimes the wrong thing is the right thing. Our own Allison Oleg, our director of stewardship, has an interesting story, and she gave me permission to share it with you this morning. Born in the Midwest to a mother she calls a workaholic, Allison went from college to law school into a good job at a big law firm. She married her high school sweetheart along the way and found herself living in a big house in a good neighborhood, ready to start a family. Except for one thing. Something didn't feel right. Something didn't feel right inside. She talked about that feeling with family and friends, and especially with her husband. And with his blessing, she decided to say no to the lifestyle and yes to a deeper truth. She left the law firm to work in the world of nonprofits. That was 7 years ago, and she says she still doesn't regret it. Despite the losses, financial and social, she was surprised at the special treatment she received from people when they found out she was a lawyer. So we could say that Allison transcended both the expectations others had for her and the expectations she had for herself, and that she found a new freedom on the other side of what I'm calling this morning spiritual disobedience. Transcendentalism, as expressed through the works of Thoreau, Emerson, and Parker, and others, encourages us to be spiritually disobedient. It teaches us that we can rely on our own intuition and our own experiences to guide us toward healing and wholeness. 200 years of advances in science support this claim. Today we know our intuition is grounded by evolution, hardwired into our brains and an integral part of being human. Think Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. And if you haven't read it, you might want to. Transcendentalism, this idealistically poetic, beautifully innocent, passionately individualistic, philosophical approach to the religious life, as imperfect as it is our inheritance. And transcendentalists believed in testing the truth. Thoreau never followed a rule without understanding and believing in its morality. It's how he became an icon of integrity. For example, he refused to pay the poll tax when it supported our military forces fighting in the Spanish-American War, a war he didn't believe in. How did he grow to be so strong of character? The cabin he built for himself in the woods, which he lived in for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, was 10 feet by 15 feet. I measured it, so it's about like from here to the middle of the lectern long, and about 2/3 of the chancel deep. So it would have fit, his whole home for 2 years would have fit right on our chancel. And in that cabin, he had 3 chairs, which I think give us a clue. He had 1 chair for solitude, 1 for friendship, and 1 for society. Just those 3 simple chairs are a guide to the kind of life Thoreau led. The first chair reminds us that if our attention is always or mostly focused on other people and other people's needs, we can lose touch with ourselves. Our soul needs solitude as much as our bodies need air to breathe. And the second chair reminds us that we all need the love of friends to endure the inevitable losses and heartbreaks of life, but the cabin was only 1.5 miles from Emerson's house, and guests were always welcome. And the third chair reminds us that Thoreau believed, like the other transcendentalists, that it is only in society that noble individualism is possible. We don't live for ourselves alone. Thoreau's walks in the woods and his nature journals weren't a way to avoid action or responsibility. They were a way to ground his actions in deep contemplation. And throughout his short life, he was a strong advocate for children's education, for the preservation of parks and forests, for instruction and recreation, and for the abolition of slavery. He not only spoke out and wrote about the abolition of slavery, he sheltered fugitive slaves. He praised John Brown for leading the Harper's Ferry Rebellion, a slave rebellion in 1859, and said Brown was a transcendentalist and above all a man of ideas and principles. And on the day of Brown's execution, Thoreau held a memorial service for him. And the next day, he helped one of Brown's men who had escaped make his way to Canada. So as we celebrate Thoreau's life and legacy this morning, I challenge you, as he would challenge you, to check the balance in your own life between solitude and friendship and society. And I challenge you to focus on what your own experiences are telling you about how you might still live deep and suck out all the marrow of life at whatever stage you are. And one way, the way I recommend to you this week to honestly explore and debate is to honestly explore and debate, maybe just with yourself, when and why you've been disobedient. Were you obeying, perhaps consciously or unconsciously, a higher authority or a deeper call? Maybe not. It's possible you were being willfully disobedient for your own gain or your own pleasure. But still, sometimes the plan our parents or our church or our teachers or our bosses or our community or our God have for us, or the community has for us, are not the same as the plan God has for us. In Thoreau's words, I wish to begin this day well, to do something in it worthy of it and of me, to transcend my daily routine, to have my immortality now in the quality of my life. Our responsibility isn't to obey the demands of the conventional world. Our responsibility is not to find a good job or to marry the right person or to make a lot of money. Our responsibility as human beings, our purpose, if you will, is to disobey whatever demands lead us away from instead of towards our true selves. Because that's what the world needs. So how will you make a Walden of your life then? Because transcendence awaits you too.
You're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
LOVEBB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256 or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed.
and be a blessing.